Hello everybody and welcome back to State of the Division UFC 283. This video was late, I'm editing it last minute, a lot of things went wrong and I've been busy and I apologize. But this is actually an interesting card to talk about. I think we have some interesting up-and-comers who are worth keeping an eye on going forward. We have a pretty fun main event, a really fun what should have been the main event, and a really good main card with some fun prelims. But let's jump right in, as always, with the early prelims. Starting us off, 18-4, Simon Oliveira, trying to get going against the other newcomer, 13-0, Daniel Sancoro Marcos. Oliveira is 2 years older, 3 inches shorter, but does take 3 in reach. Both guys are relatively new to the whole UFC thing, so there isn't a whole lot to go off of. Oliveira is coming off a unanimous loss to Tony Gravely, and across his fights he tends to keep the striking close, but his bread and butter is his ground game. 3 takedowns for 6-ish minutes of ground control. But in his Gravely fight, he was taken down 11 times, did throw 4 takedowns as well though. Marcos looks to be a striker, rocking an 81-45 in his Contender Series fight. He also has rocked 7 career KOs, so it seems like that is what his bread and butter is in comparison. The Vegas favorite is Simon Oliveira, and I'm going to agree. Obviously, it looks like Marcos has the ability to get the finish, but Oliveira seems to be high on takedowns, and without any other info, I'm going to run with the ground-focused fighter here. 9-1, Josiane Josie Nunes tries to keep rolling against 6-4, Zara Infinite Fan, or Zara Infinite Fan dos Santos, depending on who you look her up under. Nunes is 7 years younger, 7 inches shorter, and giving up 5 in reach. Nunes is a relatively standard striker, and by that I mean a 7.54 landed, a 4.37 absorbed, no takedowns, and a good takedown defense. Kind of what you expect from a striking-based fighter. She's got 7 KO wins in her career, 1 in the UFC so far, so the power does exist, maybe not so much present so far. She also seems to be a pretty high-quantity striker and tends to take the lead in her fights. Farron's a very different story, as she has lost both of her UFC fights and really hasn't stood out anywhere. She's been finished in both her fights, a submission and a KO, and has also been outstruck in both of them. In her career, she's shown the ability to get KOs, with 4 total, but none of that has shown up in the UFC. Unsurprisingly, Vegas likes the fighter who isn't coming off 2 straight losses, and I'm going to agree with Nunes. Both fighters look like they like the striking, but on that end, Nunes has shown more success, more prevalence, and generally I like her style a little more. I'll take high quantity success versus low quantity failure. 14-5, Warley Alves steps in against the 20-4-1-2, that's a goddamn total, Nicholas Danish Dynamite Dalby. Alves is 6 years younger, but does lose 2 in reach with even height across the board. Alves has a spotty UFC record since 2015, but with general consistency, he makes it out of the first round. Rocks a 307-363, which isn't great, but it speaks to his more so recent tendency of killing or being killed. That being said, his striking does act as more of a complement to his solid ground game, rocking a 1.42 takedown average. He equally is solid in the submission game, 6 career submission wins. Dalby has also been spotty since 2015. He's a dead even landed and absorbed with a 3.22, and that backs up his ground game of 1.22. That being said, Dalby shows up as more of a grinder throughout since 2015, getting those decision wins through decent striking leads and strong control time moments or fights. Narrowly, Vegas likes Alves here. It's easy to see why. Both fighters seem kind of like counters to each other, kind of the killer be killed submission guy versus the grinding, pick you up, put you on the ground guy. However, I'm going to deviate to Dalby here. In part, he has a lower absorbed, which I like. And he doesn't really seem to get finished in his fights. Maybe Alves is the guy to do it, but I'm going to pick Dalby here. 18-3, Ismael Moreta Bonfim tries to keep his streak alive against 13-4, Terrence T-Rex McKinney. Bonfim is 1 year younger at 27, 1 inch shorter, but does give up 5 in reach. Bonfim is making his official UFC debut because Contender Series doesn't count, and looks to be a pretty well-rounded fighter. 8 KO wins, 4 submissions, 6 decision. His Contender Series fight showed a lot of his skill on display, but I think it's worth asking how much of his ground game is going to transfer over against this higher level competition, especially since in that fight he only had 6 seconds of ground control. McKinney is a bit of a mixed bag in all honesty. His striking percentage is good at 4.70 to 2.11, but a lot of his wins have really low striking totals. One part of that is his ability to get power to come through on occasion, but his other is a 5.11 takedown average and submission ability he can call on when needed. Vegas likes McKinney here. I'm going to agree. It's a bit boring, but while I think Bonfim has a shot, McKinney has had division experience in the UFC. He has a solid takedown and striking defense, which sort of neutralizes what Bonfim's been showing so far. And I think that his ability to control the ground or dominate on the ground can match or at least survive Bonfim. UFC newcomer 12-1 Luan Lacerda looks to keep his streak going against 25-1 Cody the Spartan Stamen. I think I said that right. Lacerda is 3 years younger and maybe an inch taller, but I can't tell because Sherdog and UFC don't agree. Lacerda looks to be a ground-heavy fighter with a heavy focus on the ground game. And he also poses a constant submission threat, especially since he rocks 10 career wins that way. He has lost once by submission and doesn't seem to be much of a striking threat based on what I can see. Stamen, on the other hand, is jankier, and that's the best way I can put it. He rocks a 4.19 to 3.39 striking, a 2.76 takedown average. However, he has had a recent issue with being decisioned in fights, winning 2 of his 5 since 2020. Vegas likes Stamen here, and I'm going to disagree and go with the young gun Lacerda. It's a longer shot for sure, but Lacerda is a ground-heavy fighter who lives with submissions. And in Stamen's fights since 2020, he's been taken out 8 times. In 1, 2, 5, 0, a loss by submission though, and 0. Ending off our early prelims with the heavyweights, the best weight division. 20-7, Shamil Abrek Abdurakhimov looks to stop the skid against UFC heavyweights newcomer, I'll say, 17-2, Halton Maldahino Almeida. Almeida is 11 years younger at 31 and looks to take 3 in reach. It may also be worth noting that Almeida is moving up to heavyweight from light heavyweight. He does have 1 heavyweight fight on record, but the majority of his fights have been light heavyweight, so I stand by my statement. Shamil has had a rough patch over the last 3 against some of the higher level of competition in the division. That being said, he rocks a standard heavyweight ratio, 2.6 to 2.8, which speaks to his use of power and relatively close striking totals. He has also shown the ability to shoot takedowns, but hasn't been able to get one in the last 3, in addition to 5 takedowns against by Curtis Blades, with a caveat of that is Curtis Blades, who's kind of been one of the premier wrestlers in the heavyweight division for a while now. Almeida has fought 3 times last year, and won all 3, but is a very different bag of tricks. He rocks a 3.56 to a .43 with his striking, which is solid, makes more sense when you see his takedown average of 7.18, majority of wins coming in the first. He's dangerous with submissions as well. Vegas likes Halton here, but I think it's a lot closer than the Vegas odds show. And in the end, I'm going to default to the natural heavyweight here, and I'm going to pick Shamil. I know Halton has had a heavyweight fight, but it was over Parker Porter. And not to disparage Porter, he's made it to the UFC, and he's kind of shown up in fights. I think Shamil's a very different type of fighter, and I think he's had the chance to go against the upper level competition and face heavyweight wrestlers, heavyweight people. And I don't know if Halton's going to be able to make that jump and match Shamil off the bat. But starting off our prelims, 13-0, Gabriel Martinho Bonfim, who actually is Ismail's brother, which I think is a first on this card, which is a first for the UFC, if I remember correctly, looks to debut strong against 11-2, Monir the Sniper Lazez, who wins best ring name for the night. Bonfim being 10 years younger at 25, Jesus, same height, but surrenders 4 in reach. Bonfim looks to be a ground-focused fighter with a heavy emphasis on submissions. Can't say he's a killer-be-killed fighter, but he looks to be working towards the finish at all times. Does have 3 KO wins, but it really doesn't seem to be a focus. Lazez has proven to be a bit more of a striker, 7.40 to 5.28, though in the UFC, he hasn't shown up as much of a finisher, but he does have 8 career KO TKO wins. Now, Vegas likes Bonfim, the other one, and I'm going to agree kind of because it's bland. I feel like this fight's really close. I don't have a lot of information here. I'm going to jump on the hype train that apparently exists for this fighter. I don't know. 16-6, Thiago Moses tries to get a streak back against the 19-5, Medkazaza Milk Coffee Costa with 1 year inch and 1 inch height going to Costa. No idea in reach. Moses is a grinder, 2.48 to 4.02 in striking, Jesus, with a takedown average of 1.11. Really likes triples there. Never really seems to run away with the striking in his fights, and most cases will just keep it within spitting distance. His takedown game is where I think he's the most effective since he can get his control time there and seems to be good at it. He can submit, but it isn't his absolute go-to, it seems. Costa is making his debut here. I believe he is replacing somebody, in fact. but he seems to be a bit more of a rounded fighter. 7 KO wins, 6 submission, 6 decision, able to kind of move between all three. He seems to be good at avoiding the finish, but has been decisioned 3 times. Vegas likes Moses here, and I'm going to default to the veteran and agree. Costa has proven that he's able to lose by decision, and that seems to be his main losses by decision. And Moses kind of specializes in getting to that point, so I'm going to pick him here. 13-4, Gregory Robocop Rodriguez squares off against 9-0 Bruno the Hulk Ferreira. Same age for both fighters, 5 inches in height to Rodriguez, who also steals 3 in reach. Rodriguez has a bit of a weird spread of stats, but he comes across as a bit of a slugger. 6.19 landed to 5.87 absorbed with a takedown average of 2.39. Tends to get his takedowns in his wins, but all the finishes themselves are by punch, not to mention he seems to be about a minute-ish of ground control total. Ferreira is a newcomer off a Contender Series win, but looks like a heavy hitter when it comes to strikes. But on the same note, he has a takedown game with submission ability. That's all I can really tell. Vegas likes Rodriguez here. I'm tentative to agree, given how little information I have, and that Ferreira is coming off a hot streak. But I'm going to go with the veteran here. I like his experience a little more. I like his tactical kind of takedowns. I always value those a lot. And I don't know if Ferreira will be up to the immediate task of facing someone who's been around as like he has. But ending off our prelims. 27, 13-1, Mauricio Shogun Rua steps in against 18-3, Ihor the Duelist Potieria in the battle of ring names here. Potieria is 15 years younger at 26. Jesus. With the only other real measurement here being 2 inches in height to Potieria. Rua is the old guard of the UFC and MMA in general, and walks into the fight with a ground-focused game, seen by a striking percentage of 3.57 to 2.77 and a 2.03 landed on his takedowns. I will say that age is catching up to him, as a great deal of his athleticism is gone, and while he can still win, it's more difficult and has him resorting to grinding more often than not. Potieria is a striker, and it seems to be a student of the swang and bang school so far. A 4.58 to a 5.89 shows this pretty soundly. He has shown some submission ability outside the UFC. I'm not sure how active that will be in this fight or in the UFC in general. The Duelist is the favorite here, and it's pretty easy to see why. Given the fact that Rua hasn't secured a takedown his last 3 fights also helps me make this decision, I'm going to go with Potieria. But to the main card. 16, 5-1, Paul Bearjew Craig looks to rebound quick against the 19-7 Johnny Walker. Walker is 5 years younger, either 1 or 3 inches taller, because Sure Dog UFC can't make up their mind, but does take 6 in reach. Craig is a dangerous man in the cage. Rocks a 2.47 to 2.79 in striking, only has 3 career KO wins though, and that tells you this exists to get him to the ground. A 1.85 takedown average, but a monster submission game with a lot of danger coming from his guard. I believe this is the fighter who dislocated Jamal Hill's elbow, if I remember correctly. It is also worth noting that he tends to get his finishes early in fights, only 3 of his UFC wins coming from the second or later. Walker's a very different type of fighter. He's a little more kill or be killed compared to Craig's decisioning. He rocks a 3.26 to a 2.64 and kind of looming knockout power, though I think his variety plays more into it than just his straight power does. He does have submission ability, but it seems to be buried behind his striking and really only showed in his last fight with Ion Cutelaba. Vegas likes Walker here, and I think this is definitely a close fight. Walker is more so the striker, and while he has a variety and can shoot takedowns, it's not often. And I think Craig has the advantage, because I think shooting a takedown puts you in his guard, which is his wheelhouse. I think Craig has shown the ability to survive on the feet enough to get him to positions he wants to be in. I'm going to pick Craig out of total bias for the ground game. 16-5, Lauren Lucky Murphy looks to build her new streak against 23-9, Jessica Batistaca Andrade. Andrade is 8 years younger at 31, either 4 or 5 inches shorter, because I can't tell anymore, and loses 5 in reach. Murphy's a pretty solid grinder. She rocks a 3.84 to a 4.45, backed up a remarkably consistent 1.11 takedown average. She occasionally does get finishes, but as I said a sentence ago, her strength is grinding to the end of a fight. Does have some experience in coming back and contending when her opponents take large striking leads, using ground control and getting to the decision. Andrade is more of a finisher, on the high-octane end of things especially with a 6.16 to 5.16 striking. She does tend to take striking leads, but there are a few times where she has gotten the finish down in strikes. She also has a formidable takedown game, a 2.85 average, and the ability to play out of a variety of positions. Vegas is heavy on Andrade here, and I'm going to agree. I think it's closer than Vegas shows, but I like Andrade here based more so on the consistent power and finishes compared to Murphy and the tendency to grind. Keeping Andrade in the game puts Murphy in danger, and grinders tend to get caught in that trap sometimes. For the last event before the title fight, and what used to be the co-main event, 20-5, Gilbert Dorginho Burns looks to reassert himself against the 27-9 Neil Haitian sensation Magny. Magny with 1 year age favoring, as well as 5 inches in height and 9 in reach. Burns is a tough wrestling-focused fighter, seen by his two flat takedown average and his tendency to secure multiple takedowns in his fights. He can throw submissions, but more often than not, he just dominates with his wrestling. He's a bit of a grinder in that way. He does also pack a good chunk of power with his punches and has proven himself to be able to hang on the feet. Magny is similar. He does tend to grind his way to the end and go to decision. He takes a 3.62, 2.27 in striking, and a 2.43 takedown average. Now, Magny has been beaten on the ground before, which is something I noticed. He also doesn't seem to have all the power that Burns does, but his striking is more than enough to let him hang in fights. Burns is the favorite here, and I think I'm going to agree. I think Burns is more so rounded in a way in comparison to Magny, and I think Burns has a lot of experience against super high level competition in that weight division, something that I don't really see a lot of Magny having. I think Magny could win this fight, but I like Burns in this fight. I think Burns' power and wrestling isn't going to overwhelm Magny, but I think it's going to pose enough of a challenge that Magny won't be able to do what he normally does. But starting off our title fights with what used to be the main event, and for the fourth goddamn time, 21-2-1, Davison Deus de Guerrera, Figueiredo, tries to settle the score against the 26-2 Brandon Assassin Baby Moreno. Moreno is 6 years younger, 2 inches taller, and does steal 2 in reach. Now, Figueiredo, I'm pretty sure has been on the series twice already, but is a very well-rounded fighter. He tends to go for the finish, and in that has shown his striking power, which is a great backup to a 3.27 to 3.53 striking ratio. He also has a solid ground game with a 1.48 average and submission ability. I will say he does have a lot of power for his division and does use it to his advantage. Moreno, on the other hand, is similar to Figueiredo stat-wise, 3.58 to 3.33 and a 1.71 takedown average. His game does have more submissions, it seems, and he seems to like that ground game a bit more than his striking. I think his variety of striking also plays into his knockouts more than Figueiredo's power, and I will say of the two fighters, I feel like Moreno is the one that has a greater top speed, but Figueiredo has proven to be able to at least keep up. Now, Vegas likes Moreno by a narrow margin, but I'm going to go with Figueiredo here. Nothing against Moreno. I don't think Figueiredo is that much of a better fighter, but I think Figueiredo learned from his mistakes against Moreno. And I think that no matter what, this will be a close fight, but I think Figueiredo will be able to just get the edge to get him to the end. For the main event and a latest addition to this card overall, 33-8, former champion Glover Teixeira looks for his belt back against 11-1-0-1 Jamal Sweet Dreams Hill. Hill is 12 years younger at 31, 2 inches taller, and does take 3 in reach. Teixeira is a very talented fighter, and despite his age, is a legitimate threat with his ground game. That being said, we've seen a lot of the hallmarks of a ground fighter in his stats. A 3.80 landed to a 3.93 absorbed, and a 2.0 takedown average. Not to mention his submissions, which are deadly. But to focus on a weakness, his striking is good enough to hang in fights, and he is occasionally able to get his power off. By no means is it his focus. His ground game is where the danger is at, and the ability he has to play from a variety of positions. Hill's a very different fighter, though. He rocks a 6.46, 3.51 in striking, and an 0.00 takedown average. Hill's a definite threat on the feet, a definite threat when it comes to power, and I'm willing to say he has a really solid glass of MMA boxing, MMA striking in general. He's dangerous, he knows how to maneuver, he can survive on the cage or in the clinch. He's also able to pour it on to just simply rack up numbers, or he can rely on his power. Vegas likes Hill for rather obvious reasons, about 12 of them, but I'm going to disagree. I'm really torn here overall, but Teixeira went to war against Jiri, and I think he proved that against these high-level strikers, he can stand in the box. Will he win every time? No. But I think in this fight, this is a big jump for Hill. Teixeira's been here before. I think he has the momentum. I also think this is plain favoritism, but I'm going to pick Glover here. Well, that being said, this is UFC 283. It's interesting. I don't think anything that happens this fight is going to determine a division for the long-term future. I think we're going to see a few interesting guys. If Magny beats Burns, I think Magny is able to make a big jump and possibly challenge here soon once Edwards fights Usman again. If Burns wins, I think we have an argument for Burns to be back in there. The heavyweight fight will be interesting because if Hulting wins, I think we have a new face to look at in the division to possibly do something. Murphy Andrade could have some implications depending on how it goes. Murphy's been a mainstay for a while, but if Andrade wins, I think Andrade skyrockets from her position. Overall, it's an interesting card. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Thank you for watching.